Good morning, dear friends. Today is Thursday, July 22nd, I believe, the 13th of,
Oh, my
we're
birthday's only
studying,
2 days.
I'm sorry,
Birthday's only 2 days away. Tubab.
whose birthday? Your birthday?
Tubab.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
I'm a romantic.
So hold on, let's first say what we're doing, then we'll get into the congratulations. So we're studying the whole Talmud, one page, one line at a time. We're studying right now ch6, Shabbas, chapter 6. We are on 64b, and we're about to start a new Mishnah that's going to enumerate another series of items more in the women's apparel genre. And I just want to briefly revisit the segment of the Gemara that I breezed through yesterday. I was hoping to find a more robust chart, but I'm going to endeavor to provide for you, once again, just the outline of the Gemara, which is actually a lengthy brisa, teaching us the extent of the comparisons, halachic comparisons between different types of biblically enumerated impurities. As we know, in the temple time, or I should say in the biblical text, and in the temple times, ritual purity was of great importance because if you were a Kohen or a Levite or an Israelite who wanted to visit the Beis Hamikdash, Jerusalem, or otherwise interact with folks that were mindful of ritual purity and impurity, you had to be pure. And if one became impure, they would have to go to the mikveh and undergo other courses of purification as specified in the Torah and in the oral tradition. Now, there are a number of things or ways that somebody could become ritually impure. The most well-known, I believe, way that a person could become ritually impure is by coming in contact with a corpse, a dead body, or going to a cemetery, a funeral, and that is called tumat met, impurity that comes from contact with a corpse, with a body. However, there are several other ways to become impure, and the other primary type of impurity that we're discussing today is asherets. Asherets were certain crawling critters that, when they were dead, they could or under certain conditions, they could convey and confer ritual impurity. Okay, that's not a problem. That's okay. Each one of them have their distinct laws, and they also have the areas where they have a lot in common. What distinguishes these two types of purity? Well, the term of your impurity. To become pure from a tumas mes, it's a 7-day process. And to become pure from a sheretz was just a simple go to the mikveh and wait for sundown. There are other distinctions, however, that run the other way. How large, not to get too graphic, but if, God forbid, we're dealing with not a human body, but human remains, there has to be a certain volume of human remains to become ritually impure, which is larger, I believe it's a beya, we'll check in the Gemara in a moment, which is larger than the adasha, a lentil size of a sheretz, because a sheretz could be a very small creature or even part of a creature. And so in a sense, there are areas where the law of purity and impurity are more lenient by a sheretz, and there are ways that are more strict, and vice versa. Now, the issue our Gemara has is not really those two types of impurity. It's to figure out which kind of vessels, which kind of items can become ritually impure. As you may recall, it all started because we were talking about the impurity and the purity of different vessels that were found in Moab and other scenarios, and we wanted to know about if it was a certain size and dimension, if you recall that. And so the Gemara had some questions. The Gemara wanted to know about woven garments. How do you know that it could be ritually impure? And what if it's made out of atypical material? What if it's sack? What if it's coarse? Or what if it's made of other animal hair? What's the halacha? So ultimately, what we saw yesterday, and I went through it fast, and I told you we'll revisit today, and I'm going to just try to give you the summary, which is what I'm doing now. Initially, the Gemara thought to use a certain formula to try to adopt principles of impurity from sheretz to mes and vice versa. ultimately what the Gemara ends up doing is finding two words that are identical in both narratives of impurity. The words are, let me just find them, make sure we get them to you correctly. The words that are identical in both narratives are beged va'ar, a garment and of leather. When you have two words or one word that is identical in two biblical narratives, that can become a gzeira shava. What is a gzeira shava? Anyone want to say what a gzeira shava is? We can project or infer common halachic principles to both topics. And so, in the context of purity, by a sheretz and a mace, if we have a gzeira shava, we can now understand that we'll apply the principles of what can become impure. And what principle are we discussing? That all items that are woven and spun, that are made of goat's hair, or even not of goat's hair, even of other animals, can become ritually impure. Because again, just to remind you, not everything can become ritually impure. There are criteria for what can become ritually impure, and that was the crux of yesterday's discussion. And now the Gemara identifies a gzeira shava, which tells us that we can apply it back and forth, or between tumas meis and sheretz. The Gemara then says, now that we are able to use gzeira shava to cross, I need a good word, but basically to confer halachic facts, principles back and forth, it frees up a word, oy sak, the word oy, which is redundant, to teach us about other kinds of skins. The Gemara then has to go on a little bit of a minor detour. Again, I'm giving this to you all outside so we can go on to the next Gemara. The Gemara goes on to a minor detour, proving or being certain that the word oy can actually be used to teach us about other fibers that come from animals that are not from goats. The Gemara then has one last issue that is interesting to the Gemara, and this is, after that we'll jump into the new Mishnah. The Gemara, and this is something I'll tell you that it's not frequently, it doesn't frequently come up in the Gemara. A gzeira shava, again, same word in two contexts that allow us to compare from one to the other. That's a common principle. As a matter of fact, if you'll open your prayer book, there's a paragraph right before, in the Chabad Nosach, right before we say the Kaddish, the Rabbanan, called Rabbi Shmuel Omer. It's a teaching from Rabbi Shmuel, and where he enumerates 13 different formula, 13 different principles that are used in the Mishnah and then in the Gemara to extract halachic data from a pasuk. Psukim, verses in the Torah, many times written in shorthand, and there are 13 different principles of how we can build out and develop our halachic knowledge about a given topic. The number 2 item is, because Rabbi Shmuel Kal v'chomer gzeira shava. The first thing is kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer is a logical principle. We'll put on the side for now, and then you have gzeira shava. Gzeira shava is the ability to compare two things. Now, gzeira shava is unique in that we don't make up gzeira shava. So gzeira shava has to originate in Masorah, in tradition. Now, even if you have a gzeira shava, how robust, how waterproof, how solid the gzeira shava is depends on, and I hope I'm not being too confused, I'm trying to simplify it, depends on the utility of the word employed in the gzeira shava. What do I mean? It says beged v'kol kli beged v'kli or, v'kol beged v'or, a vessel made out of clothing, a garment, and skin. If those words are redundant, meaning they don't teach us anything new in the subject, then that is the most powerful kind of gzeira shava. It's an untouchable gzeira shava. If those words are needed to teach us other halachic facts, other halachic principles besides for the gzeira shava, it makes it a little more vulnerable to challenge. And so what our Gemara basically does is it charts the gzeira shava between mace and sheretz, a corpse and a sheretz. It interrogates the process a little bit. It confirms that this is a robust Gzeira Shava, and therefore we know that not only regular garments are impure, but anything that's spun, even if it's made of goat's hair, even if it's made of other hair, is considered a vessel or is considered something that is susceptible to impurity. That is the totality of yesterday's text. See it inside, it's a little bit of a roller coaster. And so that is the part of the Gemara that I told you we'll revisit. If you want to see, it's in Hebrew actually, so I don't know if it's going to be helpful, but let me just share the screen. I'll show you a little chart that I found in Hebrew. Let me see if I can zoom in. Again, this is just here. He goes like this. We have, just listen carefully, and then this is going to be the last comment. There are 4 items that we discuss in our Gemara. Sak, this coarse burlap-like material made of goat's hair that's not finely woven, it's threaded in a more coarse manner. It was typically worn by shepherds, as Rashi says, and it was somewhat waterproof. Is that something that's susceptible to ritual impurity? Yes, because the Bible uses the word sak by sheretz, and the Bible uses, the Torah uses the word v'chol masa izim. This we read together in the text. Anything that's made out of goats. Then the Gemara asked, and this is the next item on the chart, kilkali, what about these well-spun goat's hair items used to secure a saddle or other stuff on a horse? Can that become ritually impure? And the Gemara says yes. You know why? How I know that? Because by a mess, the pasuk says, look over here where I'm highlighting, v'chol masa izim, which extends to anything made of goat's hair, including these well-spun animal accessories. And it could also become impure from a sheretz because the word beged va'ar exists in both contexts. And so we can take this piece of data and transfer it with the formula of Gzeira Shava to include these animal gear that can become ritually impure by sheretz. What about ropes and cords that are not well woven or spun? They are pure. Why are they pure? Because they're not spun at all and they don't get included in Maisa Izim. How do we know they're pure? By a mess? Because there's Gzeira Shava, the same Beged Va'ar that exists in both contexts, allows us to borrow facts from Tumas Meis to Sheretz, allows us to borrow facts or lend facts from the Sheretz to the mess. The Gemara then says, okay, what about hair that is developed and spun into accessories, but it comes from a horse's tail or a cow's tail? So the Gemara or the Brisa that's quoted in our Gemara says, you know, it says oy sak. The word oy is a dish extra. And so it includes one extra item, and it's going to be these alternative fiber sources from other animals. And that is in the context of sheretz. And similarly, it becomes impure by Tumas Meis because, again, there's a Gzeira Shava. So just to recap one more time, there are 3 halachas, and we want to know if they are what the 3 subjects. There's 3 items that we want to know. Can it become ritually impure? We want to know if it could become ritually impure by a sheretz, by a crawling critter, and by a mess. And by using the formula of Gzeira Shava, we can apply cross-discipline between the subjects to know that these well-developed animal accessories are impure or can come impure. Not well-developed ropes and cords do not become impure. And even if the item is not made out of goat's hair, but it's made out of horse or cow hair, it would also become ritually impure. There's a pasuk that teaches us about sheretz, and there's a Gzeira Shava that teaches it to us by Tumas Mes. If this is confusing, you will not be tested on this. Rabbi Beryl, go ahead.
Rabbi, am I to understand from that the words or and beged appear anywhere else in the entire Torah?
They do. But here it's not just a word, it is a how do you call it? It's a sentence fragment. Words. In this structure, no. Beged va'or, 2 contexts where let me add a detail. These 2 words exist in 2 contexts and they are not needed. we would figure everything out without them. The redundancy, the halachic redundancy teaches us that there's a secret code here. Now, I want to tell you something. The way I understand these formulas, the 13 formulas, and Professor Stern is probably going to tell me that I'm getting it very wrong, but I see the Torah with the 13 formula to understand it as the first chip, the first computer that contains compressed, maybe I'm not using the words, data, and with the right tool, we can extract, infer, and open up and have and read all that data. I'm probably using the wrong words to explain it, but Professor, is there, can we make it, can the case be made that this is an instance of a type of compressed way to hold data that we can then extract with the right formula or the right equipment?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
And in general, working with computers, I find most of analogies of other things to computers superficial and not useful, in the sense that you will make an analogy, I don't know, like a brain and a computer, but those analogies don't lead to anything useful.
Okay.
And also, they are superficial and don't touch the internal essence of each of those items. However, for this topic, I find it fascinating and very complex, but I wonder, is there any connection with Shabbat, or is just a lengthy detour that happens from time to time in Gemara?
This is a detour that is a hallmark of the Gemara's style. But I just need to ask one more question. And I mean, is the tool called an abacus?
Rabbi, in computers, this is impossible. To have a detour.
Oh no! I was asking strictly the fact that you have a Torah, which is just a certain size, but within the words there's data that's waiting to be extracted by certain formula. I was asking if that might be akin to a chip, or the way data is compressed. A lot of data is contained in a small chip. That was my question. But I think you said that
again, no.
Superficial and not really beneficial in any.
No operation can extract from a computer memory what wasn't there before, and it doesn't depend on the way how you try to approach it. Here, the Chachamim applied their ingenuity, but like using Gzeira Shava, but there is no feeling that this is the only way to apply even Gzeira Shava. So what we have to contend with is that this is a tradition that they receive, but not the result of the operation, not the result of the independent thinking. As you said,
I'm making the argument. I'm going to make the argument that the Torah was the text of the Torah Shabbas, the written Torah, which has all these redundancies and extra words, which the Talmud tells us is meant to teach us something. So our tradition says that it came alongside with a deciphering system,
right,
and with specific known destinations. So it's not per se. I know why that someone could push back, but the theory is, the idea is that the Torah has all these ideas hidden in them, and they're meant to be known to inform Jewish practice. And all you need to know is have the tradition and these principles, and you're actually coming to the singular conclusion that is meant to be extracted from the text. Now, this
exactly. This is the Torah and the interpretation come together, and we are not allowed to do our own similar interpretations, because if we were allowed to do that, there would be no end how far we could go
We
and
could
what
each,
conclusions we could derive from the text. So
Yes.
the existence of tradition is crucial here.
Professor, I want to thank you for keeping us focused and accurate. And that concludes our discussion on this formula that I zoomed through yesterday, and I told you that we'd revisit. And I hope that you're not disappointed at the way we revisited it. And now we're going to go to the new Mishnah, because what happened is we went through that whole discussion, and then the Gemara had a final reading, which we read yesterday, which was the Gemara's interpretation and ethical understanding of the story of the warriors who returned with the captives, and Moshe accuses them of possibly revisiting their old sins, and they said no, but then they said we want to bring an atonement, and Moshe said, you're feeling guilty then. Why are you guilty? You just said you're innocent. And so they said, no, we actually haven't been touched, and the evidence points that we truly haven't sinned, but we can't be certain about what the thoughts are that crossed our mind, and we want to make things right with Hashem in that way. So that was the next part of the Gemara that we read yesterday. Now, just one more exercise, because the professor asked a good question, and I like to chart this just for our own interest, and I hope no one here is getting dizzy by the scrolling. How do we get into this discussion? So it came from a segment of the Gemara talking about a biris, which was a certain kind of garment that we discussed if it could or couldn't become ritually, if it could or could not be worn on Shabbos. The very Mishnah that introduced us to the biris also spoke of its ritual purity status. When I say ritual purity status, what I mean to say is if it is susceptible to impurity or not. So the Mishnah basically said like this: biris, it's a long time ago. Biris, the garter tahira, is ritually not susceptible to impurity, and you can wear it on Shabbos. So because the Mishnah started talking about biris tahira, our Gemara started saying, hold on, why is it ritually pure? Why is it any different than a bracelet? Which led us through a whole discussion about the distinction between a garter and a bracelet. Following that, the Gemara continued along the lines of a discussion of things that can and cannot become susceptible to ritual impurity. The Gemara went on to say, even very small things could sometimes become ritually impure. For example, the ch6. For example, the kohen's plate. That was how the detour started. And then we had a whole discussion about the ch6, about the gold plate of the kohen gadol, what it looked like, how the words were, and that was proof of ritual impurity even on a small accessory. Once we were talking about that, we brought out a brisa that spoke about woven stuff and the like, which led us to a discussion about how do we know that something that's woven is impure, and we said it's because of the verse ay beged. And then once we went down that hole, we quoted a brisa, which was essentially the whole brisa of what I explained to you just now. And that's how we got there. So it's not really directly connected to Shabbos, but it is directly connected to a word that's in a Mishnah on Masechah Shabbos. But indeed, this would be considered a hallmark detour that's found in the Gemara. And the Gemara, about the Gemara, it says, Divrei Torah, Ashirim b'makam achas, v'ani b'makam acher. They are rich in one place and poor in another. And the idea was that ideally, a scholar of the Talmud wants to study the entire Talmud. Because once you study the entire Talmud and know it, every topic can enrich another section of the Gemara. That's why we're going through the whole Gemara here. And Dr. Hammer, you're muted, but we'd love to hear your voice.
Quick question.
Yes, please.
Did the ch6 midos exist before Torah Baal Peh? Or was it used before that?
To my knowledge, the ch6 midot are essentially the core tools of the Torah Baal Peh. There are other tools too, but that's like a collection of the essential and most popular tools for biblical exegesis and to interpret psukim. And so it's a good question you're asking. I'll explain to you what your question is. And I sidestepped it when the professor referenced it. But basically, there's multiple things that the Chazal, and we've discussed this many times, There are multiple things that the Chazal do, the rabbis. When they received the Torah, Moshe also said, you know what tefillin is? I'll show you what a tefillin looks like. Now, how could these psukim tell us what tefillin looks like? And Moshe said, well, because when it says the word totafos, it means X, and it tells us this detail of halacha. When it says al yodcha, well, with the formula of reading, it means yadke, it means that it's on the left hand, unless you're a lefty, and then you put on your right hand. And on and on and on. So there was all of these clues to the practice and to the elaboration of the mitzvah encoded inside the words of the Torah. How do you find those? How do you know what those codes are? Because Moshe taught the Jews those details alongside the Torah, which was also coupled with the 13 principles for. And so, in addition, but what gets confusing is besides for that, the Chazal also made their own takanis and built out and added details to certain mitzvot. But the Shlosh Esrei Midot, that is the fundamental tools of the Torah Shebaal Peh. And so when we say that the whole Torah was given on Moshe Sinai, the Torah Shebechsav, the Torah Shebaal Peh, what we mean to say is that Moshe received the text of the Torah alongside with Hashem's instruction of how to observe all the mitzvot. Now, many of those mitzvot are not necessarily understandable by the written text alone, but Moshe also had the oral elaboration and explained those verses and taught how it could mean what the practice is. There's more to obviously to elaborate on that, but that is the essence of it. Mishnah, new Mishnah. This Mishnah is going to bring up another big question that I'm going to address partly today, and maybe in the coming days we'll address more at length. And as soon as I read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yoitza isha v'chutei seir. And isha, women, are allowed to go outside on Shabbos with chutei seir, with hair in their hair. How do you end up getting hair in your hair? That's a pretty crazy thing to happen, hair in your hair. No, so Rashi says, shekelas b'hen sa'ara, that you braided into your hair highlights or additional decorative hair. Bei mishala, now where does that hair come from? There are many options. It could be her own hair that was cut off and she saved it and uses it as an extension. You know, when you're playing outside, you want your hair to be a little shorter, but when you're going to a bar mitzvah, the girl wants to have longer hair, and so she has some highlights that she braids into her hair. Bei mishal chaverta, maybe she doesn't have any of those braids, so she asked her friend if she could borrow or buy a braid to weave into her hair. Bei mishal behema, even if it's not from a human, maybe it's not human hair. Maybe there are other certain animals that have hair certain hairs that look pretty human-like. Rashi says, you know what kind of hair might look nice in your hair? Well, kigan sus, horses have some very pretty, smooth hair. And so the Mishnah says a woman may wear these items on their head on Shabbos, no problem. Now, there's other things that they may wear out. These items are going to be explained in the Mishnah.
Rabbi, before you leave the hair thing, would synthetic hair be covered here?
So that's a very interesting question. What about synthetic hair? We can make an assumption that it would most likely include synthetic hair. If it includes her own hair, someone else's hair, animal hair, it might include synthetic hair. It might not. That's something that we need to look into. So Rebero, don't forget that question. And down the road, as we continue.
It's okay if it's synthetic hair from an animal, we'd be okay.
Well, synthetic hair is not, in English,
Obviously.
synthetic hair is not animal hair, right?
Obviously. I was trying to be funny. Sorry.
Keep your day job, Bernie.
It comes from a synthetic animal. I don't understand the problem. Okay. Enough.
By the way, some of these items are going to be somewhat familiar. Ubi toitefes. At least the Gemara mentioned toitefes before. A toitefes. Does anyone recall what a totefes is? Well, it was some kind of jewelry that went on this part of the head. Similar to the words v'hayulet totafos. Frontlets, I think, is the way the Rabbi Hertz translations are, right? Frontlets. But here again, we didn't translate it yet, but we've already discussed what totefes is. It was a golden headband, possibly. Maybe not very different than the Kohen Gadol's tzitz. Uvis sarbitin bizman shehem tifurim. She also may wear sarbitin, which was another kind of hair accessory, which was sometimes interwoven into her hair. And you know what? They won't fall out. And what's wrong if something falls out on Shabbos? Well, if they fall out, you might end up carrying it. Or even if it doesn't fall out, if it's able to come out, you might take it out to show to all your friends. And the Chazal are not very into taking stuff off and showing it to your friends on Shabbos in the public domain, because that's a very easy way to inadvertently carry on Shabbos. And the Chazal take their job of helping us not make those mistakes very seriously. Now the Mishnah is going to continue. Bi-ka or bi-chavul. Similarly, she can wear a kavul. Now you might recall, or maybe you don't recall, but our Gemara mentioned kavul previously, and we had a whole discussion if it meant a servant's kind of garment they wore to show that they were servants or slaves. And we also said it might have been a kind of cap, a kind of piece that went on the head. Rashi. Oh, no, not yet. So she can wear a kavul. Rabbi Steinsaltz calls it a woolen cap, and that's pretty much what we decided it is. Ubepeya nachris. Anybody know what a peya nachris is? This word, by the way, always bothered me. Peya nachris, a hair that's foreign. In other words, a wig. You can wear a kavul, a hairnet, or a woolen cap, and a wig. Lechatzer, you're allowed to wear it into your chatzer, but not into the public domain. Rashi. Lechatzer. A kavul u'pei nachris kai. We're talking about the cap and the wig. I'm using the translation wig, but it's not all that simple that it's not all that certain that it's precisely the way we imagine a wig to be. And that's going to be the answer to the question that I told you I'm sure we're going to have. The asur le'elameit bak b'reshus rabim. You're not allowed to go into a public domain. Itzir chashmina del chaser muter. And our Gemara here, our Mishnah here is telling us that you can go into a chaser. The kavul, the seifa de masnisin leifligu b'mered kuli alma kippah shel tzemer. Although earlier on in the Mishnah, when we had the word kavul, the sages of the Gemara were not entirely certain. What is a kavul? Here, everybody agrees that we're talking about a cap for women because of the context. That's clearly what we're talking about. Peya nachris, which we usually translate as a wig, and in modern Hebrew literature, or I should say modern halachic literature, you see the word peya nachris. It means a wig. I'll tell you why it bothered me. What bothered me was not a educated concern, but an instinctive discomfort, because nachris usually would mean a Gentile woman, and so using it so freely just felt uncomfortable. But the truth is, we're not talking about a Gentile. We're talking about a nachri or a nachris. We're talking about that it's foreign to your head, because wigs are typically foreign to your head. Most people aren't born with a wig on their head, to my knowledge. A wig has to be something that you choose to introduce to your head. What could possibly go wrong with a wig that you shouldn't be allowed to wear it into the public domain? So the Gemara is going to discuss later, but it seems like, and I found over here somewhere, I think from the Gemara, there's basically 5 or 6 different possible things that could go wrong that might restrict one's ability to wear an item outside. Let me see if I can find this text now. Hold on. Let me review this for you with you one more time. There's a text from the Vilna Gaon, and he writes an introduction to the Mishnah. He says, there are approximately 7 different things that could go wrong that might be a reason not to wear something in the public domain. Let me read them for you fast. Number 1, it's a burden. It's not something that's worn, it's something that you'd carry. You're not allowed to carry, right? That's really biblical. There's another problem. It's vulnerable to falling off. And something that's vulnerable to falling off, again, these are things that we've all discussed and heard, but it's good to recap in this context. If something might fall off, you catch it and you might carry it. 3, you might eagerly take it off to show it to your friends. An exciting new accessory, jewelry, a present. That is the third issue that could happen. Number 4, your friends might laugh at you for wearing it, or you might be afraid of your friends laughing at you for wearing it, and so you might try to take it off to avoid that shame. Some things could inflict shame. For example, anyone can think of an example that we had in the Mishnah already? A single shoe looks kind of funny unless you're not well. Your friends will laugh at you. Either wear 2 shoes or no shoes. But 1 shoe, that's very strange. 5, sometimes there are items that are very comfortable and very in place, but our Mishnah taught us that if you have to go to the mikvah on Shabbos, you're going to take it off. That might also create some Shabbos complications. Or something that creates discomfort. And lastly, the shoe that had those nails, which is a totally different genre. That was because the Chazal made a gzeira because of the trauma associated with the tragic story where the person with the shoes with the nails caused trouble. So the question is, assuming that a wig is a problem, what is the problem? And so the different commentaries in their explanation to what the wig is and to what might go wrong take different possible principles. I am thinking primarily of one that's brought over here, which is as follows. Who wears a wig? So today, well, yeah, who wears a wig? So generally speaking, there are 2 kinds of people that wear wigs.
Men and women.
Men and women. Okay, true. But in this case, we'll make men and women sound the same. Either women wear wigs because of a religious desire to cover their hair out of modesty, or a person is short on hair, and it's a very natural thing that happens where people in the course of their lifespan sometimes lose their hair. I think it's generally considered an inherited, it's most commonly follows patterns of one's maternal, again, this is not a scientific statement, but I've heard and seen that many times it could follow one's maternal grandfather. Many times that there seems to be some kind of correlation, but whatever it is, some people lose their hair at a young age, and some people that lose their hair are distressed by it. Others embrace it. And I'm not telling everyone can respond their own way. It's a natural reaction. But some people maybe lose their hair very young and they want to cover it up. And so they might want to put on a wig. And maybe there's a third category, someone that's just having fun. Now, if you're wearing a wig and you're not married, your friends are going to start saying, oh, why are you wearing a wig? You're ashamed of your hairdo? Did something go wrong? Did your barber did your hair dresser mess up? Is your hair falling out? And so someone might, to avoid the shame of those taunts that could happen, because humanity still isn't perfect, and so some people are prone to being cruel, just something that unfortunately exists. So someone might take off their wig in shame. That is one of the primary concerns that possibly could go wrong with a wig. And there's a lot more that discusses that, but that was something that I wanted to share with you. Now, the other question that I'm going to ask is this wig the wig that we wear today, or is it something different? So let's see Rashi. Pe'anachos. Klias, Seyor, Telusha, the braiding of hair that's detached. It's Sobarta al Sara, and she gathers it or puts it on her hair. Im Kliyasa, Shatiris, Balasayer. So it should make the person look like they have hair where they might not. A person that is short on hair might wear a wig. Well, actually, I don't even want to use the word wig. Some kind of hair contraption. Maybe it's more akin to a toupee. Although maybe a toupee is just a wig that maybe is a little shorter or a different style. But it seems more strategically deployed as opposed to a full head wig. That's what it sounds like from Rashi. One more second. Well, there's another alternative issue that could happen to a wig, which is maybe it'll fall off, especially in a time where it wasn't so easy to secure wigs. That could be something that could happen. Anyway, so that's the mission. The Gemara is going to discuss some more, so I want to save some of the discussion for then, but there we have it. So again, back to the Mishnah. Kavol, this cap, we pay a nachris, and something that's maybe akin to a wig, some kind of hair extension. That's not quite the hair extension in the earlier part of the Mishnah. Some kind of braided piece that you add to make your hair look more rich. B'moich sheba'azna, or a cloth that someone might put in their ear. Yeah. Uvemoich shebesandala, or maybe a cloth that's placed in one's foot gear to make it more comfortable. With kids, I think they put, what's it called? They put like something in the, but anyways, the shoe, a kind of shoe insert, an insole, something in the shoe, to make it more comfortable. And sometimes a woman might also use a garment to collect discharge. All of those things you may wear at Shabbos. I guess probably in the modern world you'd see like a tampon or a pad. So that's not something that was invented in the modern age. Bepilpel, a woman may also go out with pepper. Rashi, pilpel. Why would someone have pepper in their mouth? Pilpel aruch nesenes isha b'piyah sherecha. I guess there were certain kinds of pepper that would help combat foul breath. I'm not sure if we're talking about peppercorn or a piece of red pepper or orange pepper. I don't know what we're talking about over here. But there was some kind of pepper. Well, Beryl, I should ask you, is there any such a thing that pepper might work as a breath?
I don't know.
All right. Uvilgal melach, or possibly salt. How do you call it? A grain of salt. Rashi, sometimes salt can be helpful for teeth maladies. I know they say that sometimes gargling with salt water can help sores or that kind of thing. You shouldn't be applying it on Shabbos, but if it's already in your mouth, you're allowed to go out on Shabbos. But if a piece of pepper fell out of your mouth, please, says the Mishnah, don't put it back in. What about bubble gum? Forget bubble gum, any kind of gum. Likely a problem if you're in the public domain. Rashi, let's see the next Rashi. This is also interesting. Shein to ch6, a false tooth. In those days, I don't suppose their dentistry was quite as evolved as it is today. Baruch Hashem, today you could have dental implants and stuff, and it's mamish fully fused and attached, and it looks entirely natural. I don't suppose in those days a false tooth was quite, although maybe I'm wrong. Rashi, Shein Toteves, Notenet Bilecheha Mimakam Achar V'Hishal Zav. Sometimes you'll place something in your mouth to block up a rotting tooth or a miscolored tooth or an absent tooth. And Rashi says it could be of gold. This is an interesting debate over here. How to read the Mishnah. Some read this as one long sentence. Shein Totevet Shein Shel Zav. A replacement tooth made of gold. Most other commentaries say no, it's two different items. You have a false tooth and you have a golden tooth, which is possibly different. What would be different? Well, for starters, you don't want to mess around with a golden tooth. You probably don't want to lose it. Rabbi Matir, so Rabbi says you can absolutely wear it out on Shabbos. The Chachamim say you should take them out before Shabbos. So I wonder what that might mean. Again, this is not a halachic discussion, but some dental stuff is fused and others are removable. So would this mean that according to the Chachamim, one shouldn't wear dentures on Shabbos? Again, this is not a halachic discussion, just an interesting thing to consider. Rashi. Rebbe Matilat says, but Rebbe says you can absolutely wear it out. Chachamim say not. To kivan de mishun mishar shenayim. This is going to be important, Rashi, because it looks different than the other teeth. People are going to laugh at him and take it out. And they're going to put it in their hand. Okay, anyways. So basically the principle here would be that because it looks so different and it might be funny, people might laugh at you. Today, certainly dentures or other dental implants and other kinds of implements of the teeth look very, very real. And so likely no one would even notice, let alone laugh at their presence. So that is our Mishnah. Any comments before we go into the Gemara?
We have no dentists here, so
We
hard
have
to
no
be
dentist. You
technical.
know, we have to recruit a dentist. We should recruit
Some of
a
this
dentist.
stuff is like pulling teeth.
We should recruit a dentist. Okay. Let's see the Gemara, a little bit of the Gemara. Ooh, Sricha. When the Mishnah says that you could have hair extensions, highlights of different origins, your own hair, your friend's hair, an animal's hair, it needs to actually go through the list. Maybe when a person has their own hair in their head, it's not repulsive to her. Why would hair be repulsive at all? I don't know, but certainly someone should be comfortable with their own, something that comes from their own head. And therefore, she's not likely to take it off. Carry it. But maybe if it's not your own hair, you might be inclined to remove it. Maybe someone's going to say, hey, that doesn't look natural. That doesn't look like your hair. She might be ashamed. And therefore, we list both to say that you're allowed to wear your hair extensions. You're allowed to wear these highlights, regardless of if it's your own hair or from someone else's hair. You know, many of the shaitels, many of the wigs that are sold in general, and certainly to the Jewish community, they used to come from India. Many of them also, from what I understand, come from Ukraine. I guess there are many people that are impoverished and they sell their hair for money. And there's someone in our community who told me that they're starting a new wig company. And the whole crux of the company is going to be a very humanitarian kind of way where they create a relationship between the wig purchaser will know who the person that donated the hair is, and to create some kind of understanding of how this wig came to be available for you, and to have a certain kind of appreciation and to assist those that are impoverished. I haven't seen the full model in action, but it sounds like a very interesting concept that might be very nice. All right, it's Richa. So you need both, because one might think that someone else's hair could be more prone to be removed. Well, what if we just said that you could have someone else's hair? But at least it's human hair. But if it's made out of animal fibers, somebody might notice that it's horsehair. No one wants to be called horsehead, and so maybe they'll take it off. Sricha, therefore the Mishnah says you're allowed to wear it, even though maybe someone's going to make problems. Tana, there's a Tosefta that adds on the subject about what kind of shaitel, what kind of hair extensions a person could wear. And it's taught as follows. If you're a child, if you're young, you should wear hair that's from the general age bracket. And a person that's a little older should wear hair that is reflective of the way their hair would look like at their stage in life. Rashi, in olden times, a person that was of a distinguished age and their hair becomes whiter than its original pigmentation, well, that was considered chashuv, that was considered honorable. And so to wear young hair would be embarrassing. You're putting on dark hair? What do you mean? You're wise and you know, prestigious in your age. And so you don't want to mix up the hairs. B'shleima zakena b'shel yalda shavachula. And then the Gemara says, you know what? An older person wearing young hair, that might not be such a problem. It might be yet flattering. Ela yalda b'shel zakena amai. Gnayhula. It's a shame for her to have less fresh, vibrant hair. I did tana zakena b'shel yalda tana yalda b'shel zakena. So the primary issue should be a young person wearing old hair, but ultimately the Mishnah uses both because they both are potentially problematic. Let's see if any other commentaries. Okay. Basically, the Gemara is saying we could have just said that a young person shouldn't wear old person's hair. Why did I say both? Because it ultimately both looks kind of strange for a person to wear hair that's entirely not in their world. We'll read this text, and this will be our final 4 lines of Gemara. However, in the Talmud, this will only be like 2 lines. But the Mishnah teaches us that the cap and the wig can only be worn into a courtyard, not into the public domain. This is a chiddush. Why is it a chiddush? Let's see. Amar Rav taught, whenever the rabbis placed a restriction on wearing something out into the public domain, in truth, you even shouldn't wear it into a public courtyard, which is not considered a public domain. With the exception of this cap and a wig. Rashi calls Shastra Chachamim. Bereish Pirkin, Chote Semer, Upishin, Teitefes, Vishar Shanoyim, B'Mishnah Sha'asr Lechem L'Shus Rabim. All the items enumerated that you cannot wear into the public domain, you shouldn't even wear into a chatzar. Why? Afagav Deshar L'Tatalinu. Even though should you take it off, there's no problem. You're allowed to carry it. The Torah is clear. Lein Kedamor and Hari Hein Kechala Kelim Hanil Kat Nil Nitolim B'Chatzar Miuderach Malbush Asr Demargalo B'Nafka B'Shus Ram. The reason why you can't wear it in a courtyard is because once you're accustomed to taking something off in a more public space, even if it's not technically a Rishus Harabim, the next step is you'll by mistake wear it into the public domain and also take it off. And the exception, of course, is the kavul and peinachris, which one may wear in a chatzar. And the Gemara is going to discuss what's unique about a peinachris and a kavul, and that will be with Hashem's help tomorrow. Now, here's the thing. Tomorrow, I may be a little late for the Gemara share. My daughter has a doctor's appointment. So why don't we just do this? I'll send a text to remind you, Bli Neder. Why don't we start at 10:30 tomorrow, just to play it safe, because I'll probably be a few minutes late. So tomorrow's Friday, so we'll start around 10:30. But maybe what I'll do is I'll try to open whenever you want to come on early, I'll try to open and let everybody on, so at least the Adam can schmooze if they want. But I will be back probably around 10:30 tomorrow. The Ezer Hashem. So that's my dear friends. I want to thank you all for being here, for joining, for making this interesting and informative. With Hashem's help, we'll only have good news for all of Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
Wonderful day. Shkoyach.
It is interesting how they would want to ban a woman from going out with a cap or a wig. That's like saying that a woman who covers her hair couldn't go out on Shabbos.
Well, that's why that was the question that I told you that comes up, and that was why I said that if you read Rashi carefully, it's not certain that the wig that's defined by Rashi is quite the wig that we wear today. It might have been another hair kind of accessory that's not quite a wig. So we'll discuss some more. Folks, have a great day. Thank you all. Sei gesund.
Go, take care.